Imagine a stray dog knocking on a police station door, desperate for help. What could drive an animal to act so human-like? The answer will leave you speechless. The morning was calm and quiet in the small mountain town. The police station stood still, surrounded by tall pine trees, with a light mist covering the area. It was just before dawn, and the silence felt heavy. Inside the station, Officer Sarah sat at her desk, sipping her first coffee of the day. The air was cold, and the warmth of the coffee was comforting. Sarah had worked at the station for years, and mornings like these were normal. It was a peaceful town with not much excitement, especially this early. Most mornings started with the sound of papers shuffling or the hum of the station's heater. But today, something unusual happened. At exactly 5:47 a.m., Sarah heard a knock. It wasn't just a light tap, it was loud and firm, echoing through the quiet halls of the station. She paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips, confused. Visitors usually used the intercom or rang the doorbell. Officers used their key cards to enter. But this knock didn't fit either of those. It felt strange. She placed her coffee down and glanced at the security monitor. The screen showed the station's entrance, but the early morning darkness made the image grainy and hard to see. At first, she thought it might be someone lost or in trouble, unable to find the intercom in the dim light. But when the knock came again, louder this time, her heart skipped a beat. There was an urgency to it that she couldn't ignore. Reaching for her flashlight, Sarah leaned closer to the monitor. Her eyes scanned the feed for movement, and then she spotted it, something near the entrance. It was big, moving slightly, but the poor lighting made it hard to identify. Her mind raced. Was it a person? An animal? She couldn't be sure. Carefully, she reached for her radio to call another officer. "Dispatch to Officer Hayes," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Can you check the front entrance? We have an unusual visitor." The knock came again, filling the station with its heavy sound. Whatever it was, Sarah knew this wasn't going to be a normal day. Sarah's heart was still racing as she stared at the security monitor. She adjusted the screen to get a better view of the station's entrance. The motion-activated lights outside flickered on, illuminating the scene. That's when she saw it. Standing at the door was a stray dog. The dog was thin, its fur wet and dirty, as if it had been wandering for days. It looked straight into the camera with wide, desperate eyes. Sarah froze for a moment, unsure of what to make of the situation. It wasn't unusual to see stray animals in their small mountain town, but what happened next made her sit up straighter. The dog lifted one of its front paws and tapped against the door 3 times, almost as if it was knocking. The sound was faint but steady, echoing through the quiet station. Sarah's confusion grew. Why would a stray dog act like this? It wasn't barking, growling, or acting wild like most animals might when near humans. Instead, it seemed to have a purpose, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. The dog stepped back slightly, then raised its paw again, tapping firmly against the door once more. This time, it tilted its head toward the security camera, its eyes locking with the lens. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just knocking, it was trying to get someone's attention. It was as if the dog understood there were people inside who could help. Reaching for her radio, Sarah called into the station's internal line. "Dispatch to Officer Hayes," she said, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Can you come to the main desk? We've got a situation at the front door. It's a dog. And, I think it's trying to communicate." The static on the radio crackled before Hayes's voice responded. "A dog? You sure it's not just scratching?" he asked, clearly skeptical. "No, Hayes. It's knocking. You need to see this," Sarah replied firmly. She stood up from her desk and grabbed her flashlight. Her instincts told her this wasn't normal. Something about the dog's behavior didn't match what she knew about stray animals. As Sarah waited for Hayes to arrive, the dog knocked again, this time even more urgently. It stepped forward, placed its paw on the door, and looked back toward the forest behind it. Then it turned its head back toward the door, as if pleading. Sarah's stomach twisted. The dog wasn't just lost or looking for food, it was trying to tell them something. Hayes arrived a minute later, his boots clunking against the station floor. Sarah pointed to the monitor. "See? There it is. Look at what it's doing." Hayes leaned over the desk, squinting at the screen. His brows furrowed as he watched the dog lift its paw and tap the door again. "Okay," he said slowly, "that's not normal." Both officers stood there, watching the screen. Sarah could feel her pulse quicken. Whatever was happening, they both knew it wasn't just another stray animal passing through. Something was wrong. Officer Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the security monitor. The dog outside the police station door kept knocking, its paw tapping firmly against the metal. It wasn't scratching or whining like most stray animals might. Instead, it seemed focused, like it was trying to get someone's attention in the most deliberate way. The dog wasn't aggressive at all. There was no barking, no growling, and no signs of fear. It just stood there, its body tense but calm. Every time it knocked, it would step back slightly, look toward the forest behind it, then return its gaze to the door. It was as if it was trying to signal something urgent, but it couldn't speak. Sarah watched closely as the dog repeated this pattern. Knock, step back, look toward the forest, then knock again. The behavior was so unusual that it made her heart race. The dog wasn't acting like a normal stray. It seemed to have a purpose, and whatever that purpose was, it needed the officers to understand. Officer Hayes had joined Sarah by this point, standing beside her as they both watched the dog on the monitor. "Why does it keep looking toward the trees?" Hayes muttered, his eyes narrowing. "It's like it's trying to tell us something." "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice quiet. "But look at it, doesn't it seem desperate?" Hayes nodded. The dog's fur was dirty and matted, its legs covered in mud. Water dripped from its body, forming small puddles near its paws. It was clear the dog had been through a tough journey. Its ribs were slightly visible, showing it hadn't eaten well in days. Even more concerning, Sarah noticed a small cut on its side, partially hidden by its wet fur. The injury wasn't severe, but it was enough to show the dog had been through something rough. "It looks like it's been running for a while," Sarah said, her concern growing. "And that mud, it must have crossed through streams or wet ground to get here." The dog knocked again, this time with more urgency. Its head turned sharply toward the forest, then back at the door. It gave a soft whimper, the first sound they'd heard from it. The noise wasn't loud, but it was enough to tug at Sarah's heart. It sounded like a plea, a cry for help. "What do you think it wants?" Hayes asked, his voice quieter now, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the dog's focus. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but look at it. Whatever this is, it's not random. This dog didn't just wander here. It came for a reason." The dog knocked again, and this time, its eyes locked directly on the camera, as if it knew someone was watching. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She could see the determination in its eyes, mixed with exhaustion and desperation. This wasn't just a stray looking for food or shelter. This dog was here to get help, and it wouldn't stop until the officers understood. Officer Sarah stood by the monitor, watching the dog's persistent behavior. The knocks continued, steady and deliberate, while the dog kept glancing toward the forest. It was clear this wasn't a typical stray. This dog needed help, and it needed the officers to understand. Sergeant Cooper arrived at the dispatch desk, rubbing his eyes after being called in early. "What's going on, Sarah?" he asked, noticing the tension in the room. She pointed to the screen. "You need to see this. There's a dog at the door, and it's acting strange. It's knocking and looking toward the forest like it wants us to follow it." Cooper squinted at the monitor, watching as the dog repeated its unusual pattern. "That's not normal," he said slowly. "Have you contacted animal control?" "I thought about it," Sarah replied, "but I don't think this is something they can handle. This dog isn't aggressive. It's trying to tell us something." Officer Hayes, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "It's been here for a while now. It keeps knocking, looking back at the forest, and then at the door. It's almost like it's guiding us." Cooper let out a deep breath, his face serious. "All right, this is unusual, but let's be smart about it. We need to gear up. If we're going to follow this dog, we need to be prepared for anything." The officers quickly got to work. Sarah grabbed her flashlight, first aid kit, and body camera to document the situation. Hayes checked the tranquilizer gun, just in case they encountered wild animals in the forest. Cooper prepared a radio to stay in contact with the station, ensuring they could call for backup if needed. As they prepared, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and worry. She had never seen anything like this before. The dog's behavior was so deliberate, so focused, that it almost felt like it was asking for help on purpose. Whatever was out there, she knew it had to be serious. "We're breaking protocol, you know," Cooper said as he adjusted his gear. "We don't usually chase after stray animals. But something about this. I can't ignore it." "I feel the same," Sarah replied. "Look at the dog, it's exhausted, injured, and still, it hasn't given up. That tells me whatever it's trying to show us is urgent." The team gathered near the door, ready to step into the unknown. Sarah opened the door slowly, and the dog immediately perked up, its tail wagging slightly. It backed away from the door, turned toward the forest, and stopped, looking back at the officers. It was waiting for them. Cooper glanced at the others. "All right, let's follow it. Stay close, keep your radios on, and be alert." The dog led the way, moving with purpose but stopping every few steps to make sure the officers were keeping up. It was clear now, this wasn't just a stray. This was a guide, and the officers were about to follow it into a mystery that would change everything. The forest was quiet as the officers followed the dog deeper into the trees. The early morning sunlight barely reached the forest floor, casting long shadows across the uneven terrain. The dog moved ahead of them with a sense of purpose, navigating the path as though it knew exactly where it was going. Officer Sarah kept her flashlight pointed at the ground, watching for anything unusual. The path was rough, with roots sticking out of the ground and patches of thick mud making it slippery. But the dog seemed to know how to avoid the obstacles. Every few steps, it would stop, turn around, and wait for the officers to catch up. Its eyes would meet Sarah's, as if to say, "Hurry. There's no time to waste." Sergeant Cooper followed close behind, his hand on his radio. "This dog isn't just wandering. It's guiding us," he said, his voice low but firm. "Keep your eyes open. There's something out here." As they moved farther into the forest, the team began to notice signs of a struggle. Sarah pointed her flashlight at a patch of mud where paw prints were visible. Some were fresh, while others were smeared, as though the dog had been running back and forth. Next to the tracks, there was a piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. It was dark blue, muddied but clearly man-made. "This isn't random," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "Something happened here. The dog's been trying to get our attention for a reason." Hayes knelt to examine the fabric. "It looks like part of a jacket," he said. "And those paw prints? They've been here before. This dog has been coming and going, over and over." The urgency in the dog's behavior became even clearer as it picked up speed. It moved ahead, pausing to sniff the ground and then looking back at the officers, urging them to follow. The further they went, the rougher the terrain became. Thick brush scratched at their uniforms, and the ground grew steeper. The mud clung to their boots, making it harder to move quickly. Then, Sarah heard it, a faint sound in the distance. She stopped, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The others froze, straining to listen. After a moment, the sound came again. It was faint, almost drowned out by the rustling of the trees, but it was there, a weak, distant cry. It sounded like a human voice. The dog's ears perked up, and it let out a soft whimper. Without hesitation, it moved faster, weaving through the trees and heading toward the sound. The officers exchanged nervous glances but didn't hesitate to follow. "He's leading us to something, or someone," Cooper said. "We need to move." The cries grew louder as they pressed forward, their sense of urgency rising. The dog didn't slow down, its determination giving the officers the strength to push through. They knew they were getting closer to whatever the dog had been trying to show them all along. The forest opened up to reveal a deep ravine, its edges slick with red clay and scattered with rocks. The sound of rushing water filled the air, growing louder as the officers moved closer. The dog stopped at the edge, looking back at them with urgent eyes before stepping forward carefully, its paws skimming the slippery ground. Sarah's flashlight caught something unusual near the bottom of the ravine. "There," she called out, her voice trembling. A small figure was lying on a narrow ledge about 20 feet below, partially hidden by a fallen log. It was a boy. The officers froze for a moment, shocked. The boy's clothes were soaked, and his body was pale. He wasn't moving much, and his breaths were faint, barely visible in the cold air. His leg was trapped under the log, twisted at an unnatural angle. "Oh my God," whispered Officer Hayes. "He's alive, but just barely." Sarah crouched down at the edge, assessing the situation. The boy's lips were blue, and his small frame trembled in the freezing air. It was clear he had been stuck there for hours, exposed to the cold. His body showed signs of hypothermia, he was on the brink of losing consciousness. The dog let out a soft whine and walked to the edge of the ravine again, looking down at the boy. Sarah realized what had happened. "This dog, it's been going back and forth all night," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been trying to get help for him." Sergeant Cooper quickly grabbed his radio. "We need rescue support immediately. Injured child trapped in a ravine. Severe hypothermia. We're going to stabilize him while waiting for backup." The officers moved quickly, setting up ropes and preparing to climb down. The dog stayed close, pacing nervously but never leaving their side. It kept glancing at the boy, as if making sure the officers were doing their job. As they worked, Sarah couldn't shake the thought of how this dog had saved the boy's life. Without it, no one would have found him in time. "This dog is a hero," she said quietly, tears welling in her eyes. The rescue had only just begun, but they knew the dog's determination had made all the difference. The scene was tense as the officers quickly set up their rescue gear. The boy's fragile condition and the steep ravine made every moment feel urgent. Sergeant Cooper took the lead, calling for emergency medical support through his radio. "We've got an injured child trapped under a log, suffering from hypothermia. Send an ambulance and search and rescue team immediately," he said firmly. Sarah and Hayes worked to secure ropes while Cooper assessed the safest way to reach the boy. The sound of rushing water from the ravine echoed in the background, making it harder to focus. The dog, standing a few feet away, paced back and forth. It let out soft whimpers, its eyes glued to the boy. It seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. As Hayes began to descend carefully into the ravine, the dog moved closer to the edge. It sat down, watching every movement, as if it was making sure the officers were doing their job. When the boy let out a faint groan of pain, the dog whined loudly, its tail wagging nervously. The officers exchanged glances, amazed by the dog's behavior. "Look at it," Sarah said softly. "It's not just an animal, it's acting like it knows exactly what's happening." Hayes reached the boy and crouched beside him, checking his pulse and assessing the injury. "He's alive, but his leg is pinned pretty badly," he called out. "He's freezing. We need to get him out of here fast." The dog let out another soft whine, leaning toward the ravine as if urging them to hurry. Sarah couldn't help but feel her heart ache. This dog wasn't just a guide, it was deeply connected to the boy, desperate to see him safe. As the team worked to free the boy from under the log, the dog's whimpers grew louder whenever the boy made a sound. Sarah reached out to pat the dog gently, trying to calm it down. "We're helping him," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You brought us here, and we'll save him." After what felt like hours, Hayes finally managed to free the boy's leg. They carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, wrapping him in blankets to protect him from the cold. The dog stood close, sniffing the boy's face gently, as if checking on him. The officers pulled the stretcher up the ravine with great care. When they reached the top, the dog was waiting, wagging its tail slightly but still looking worried. The boy let out another weak groan, and the dog moved closer, nuzzling his hand lightly. As the ambulance arrived and the medical team took over, the officers stood back, wiping tears from their eyes. Sarah looked at the dog, her voice breaking. "This dog saved his life. Without it, we wouldn't have found him in time." Cooper nodded, his usual stoic demeanor replaced with emotion. "I've seen a lot in my career, but this is something I'll never forget." The dog sat quietly, watching as the ambulance drove away. Its job was done. The boy was now safe in the ambulance, wrapped in blankets and hooked up to monitors as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. The officers stood nearby, exhausted but relieved. The dog stayed close, its eyes never leaving the boy, as if making sure he was okay. It seemed calmer now, its mission complete. After a while, the boy began to stir. His eyelids fluttered, and he let out a soft groan. Sarah leaned closer, her voice gentle. "You're safe now. We found you." The boy's lips trembled as he tried to speak. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. "The dog, he stayed with me. He didn't leave." Sarah exchanged a look with Sergeant Cooper, her heart heavy with emotion. "Can you tell us what happened?" she asked softly. The boy nodded slowly, his voice shaky. "I was hiking, slipped near the ravine. My leg got stuck under the log. I thought no one would find me. But the dog, he came out of nowhere. He stayed with me through the night. I think he kept me alive." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as the boy continued. "I've known him for a few weeks. He's a stray. I started feeding him whenever I saw him in the woods. He's a good dog. He always followed me when I went hiking, like he wanted to make sure I was okay." The boy paused, his face full of gratitude and pain. "When I got stuck, he didn't leave. He kept barking, pulling at me, like he was trying to help. Then he ran off. I think he went to get you." The officers listened in stunned silence. The bond between the boy and the stray dog was more profound than they could have imagined. Despite having no home, the dog had stayed with the boy, protecting him in his most vulnerable moment. And when it couldn't help on its own, it had gone to the police station, determined to find someone who could. Sergeant Cooper let out a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. "This dog isn't just a stray. He's a hero." The boy managed a weak smile, his hand reaching out toward the dog. The dog nuzzled his hand gently, its tail wagging slightly. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just a rescue. It was a story of trust, loyalty, and a bond that had saved a life. The ambulance sped away, carrying the boy to the nearest hospital. The officers stood quietly, watching until it disappeared down the road. The boy was safe now, and they had done their job. But all they could think about was the dog standing beside them, wagging its tail softly. It had been the real hero of the day. Sarah knelt down to pet the dog, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said gently, her voice breaking. "You saved him. Without you, he wouldn't have made it." The dog wagged its tail again, nuzzling Sarah's hand. It didn't seem to understand the attention, only that its mission was over and the boy was safe. The officers exchanged glances, each overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. It wasn't just the rescue, it was the dog's determination, intelligence, and compassion that left them speechless. News of the rescue spread quickly across the town. The security footage of the dog knocking on the police station door went viral after the local media covered the story. People couldn't believe what had happened. A stray dog leading officers to save a trapped boy was something out of a movie. Soon, the story spread beyond the town, reaching newspapers, online articles, and even national news channels. The dog, who still didn't have a name, became a local hero. People started visiting the police station, hoping to see the brave animal that had saved a life. Kids brought treats and wrote letters, thanking the dog for its bravery. The town's residents came together, touched by the incredible bond between the boy and the stray dog. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the boy began to recover. Doctors treated his injuries, and his family stayed by his side. Despite his pain, the boy always asked about the dog. "Is he okay?" he would ask the nurses. "I want to see him." When the officers visited the boy, they shared updates about the dog. "He's safe," Sarah assured him. "And everyone loves him now. He's famous." The officers themselves couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Sergeant Cooper, usually stoic and calm, found himself reflecting on the experience during quiet moments. "I've worked in law enforcement for over 20 years, he told Sarah one day, "and I've never seen anything like this. That dog didn't just save the boy's life. It taught us something about trust, loyalty, and compassion." Sarah nodded. "He didn't give up. Even when the odds were against him, he kept going. That's something we can all learn from." Hayes added, "It's amazing to think about. That dog crossed so many barriers, fear of humans, exhaustion, even danger, just to save someone he cared about. It makes you wonder how much more animals understand than we think." In the weeks that followed, the dog's story continued to inspire people. It reminded everyone that compassion knows no boundaries, whether human or animal. And for the officers, the dog wasn't just a hero. It was a symbol of hope, reminding them why they chose to serve and protect. The story of the stray dog and the boy was more than just a rescue, it became a powerful reminder of how deep the bond between humans and animals can go. What happened that morning at the Mountain Ridge police station was something that no one in the small town would ever forget. It wasn't just a tale of survival, it was a lesson in empathy, trust, and the incredible connections that can form between species. The dog, despite being a stray with no home, showed extraordinary courage and loyalty. It didn't hesitate to act and the boy needed help the most. It ran miles through rough terrain, braving the cold and exhaustion, just to get the officers' attention. Its determination didn't waver, even after multiple trips between the station and the forest. The dog's actions showed not only intelligence but a heart full of compassion. For the boy, this stray wasn't just an animal, it was a guardian, a companion who stayed with him in his darkest moment. Through the cold night, the dog kept him warm, refused to leave his side, and, when it couldn't do more, went to find help. The bond they shared was unspoken yet so powerful that it saved the boy's life. It proved that love and care transcend words and species. The officers at the station were forever changed by the experience. They witnessed something they couldn't fully explain. A stray dog, acting out of pure instinct and loyalty, broke every expectation they had about animal behavior. It communicated in ways they never thought possible, showing them that sometimes, compassion doesn't need words. It's simply felt and acted upon. This story touched not only the officers but also the entire community. It spread far beyond the small mountain town, inspiring people everywhere. It reminded everyone that animals, even those without homes, are capable of extraordinary acts of kindness and bravery. They're more than just creatures, they're beings with the ability to love, protect, and connect in ways we often overlook. As we think about this story, it leaves us with an important message: empathy has no boundaries. It doesn't matter if you're human or animal. What matters is the willingness to care for someone in need, even when it's difficult. That's what the dog did, and that's what made this story so unforgettable. If this tale of courage and connection has touched your heart, there's more to discover. Stories like this show us the beauty of the bond between humans and animals, reminding us of the kindness and loyalty that exists in the world. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible rescue stories that prove the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Let's continue to celebrate these amazing moments of compassion and connection that inspire us to be better.